Democratic Socialist wrote this in 2020. I support defunding the police as a first step towards abolishing the police. Hong expressed similar views just a year later, saying police exist to uphold white supremacy, defund, then abolish. Reform can't be an option.
So I want to talk about the Wisconsin governor's race today, where Democrats seem to be in big trouble. They have a major problem specifically because, as we've seen throughout many nationwide primaries, they are unable to stop the radical communist DSA-aligned candidates from taking their nominations. That is, of course, in contrast to what we talked about earlier today down in the Sun Belt, where in Arizona, the DSA candidates are getting rejected. Now, we could debate the differences and the reasons for that. I think it comes down to aspects of the political culture, certain college towns, especially in the Midwest, that are uber far left. Of course, the fact that, honestly, cold weather liberals tend to be genuinely more insane, radical, and unhinged than warm weather liberals. But still, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. What is the big point here? You look at the Wisconsin governor's race, you combine that with, by the way, the even more important Michigan Senate race, because that is going to determine potentially the balance of power in the federal government. And in both cases, what is going down? It looks like the furthest left, most unelectable candidate is going to take both primaries. Of course, we previously told you about Abdul al-Sayed, the crazy jihadi guy. Now let's talk about the likely Democrat nominee for governor in Wisconsin, a girl by the name of Francesca Hong, who, to make a long story short, is totally, definitely not a CCP asset. She simply believes in not just abolishing ICE, but using the National Guard against ICE. So like a publicly avowed insurrectionist, effectively, is what we're talking about here. She likewise believes in abolishing the police, and we don't say that in a right-wing strawman sense. We mean she literally went on record and said she wants to abolish the police. So some pretty severely unelectable positions, obviously, especially when you're running for governor. And that has now created a situation where Democrats, the Democrat establishment specifically, is panicking and basically trying to play all the games possible to find a way to make sure the crazy DSA Francesca Hong ends up not winning the nomination. They're having people drop out. They're basically colluding with one another to fix the election around it. But frankly, when you look at the current polling and understand she's in first place by about 12 points, and this is who Democrat voters are clamoring for, I'm not exactly sure that's going to work. But again, what big picture, Democrats in the Rust Belt have a major problem. They know it. They're doing all they can to try to do character assassinations or play games or whatever to stop Francesca Hong and Abdul Sayed, but it appears none of that is really necessarily working because, after all, this is how crazy their voters are in many situations. However, why is this significant? Because it's one thing when it happens in New York City or Los Angeles. Well, the issue here is that, let's not forget, at the end of the day, while these typically lean more blue on midterm years, and yes, conventionally, if you look at the past couple of election cycles, these are races that Democrats should be able to win by quite a few points. Don't forget, Wisconsin and Michigan are still formally classified as swing states. There's nothing saying that they can only go red on the presidential level. So, of course, if at these statewide races, Democrats are going to nominate the worst possible people, which it appears they're currently in the process of doing, obviously they're in big trouble. Well, let's tell you why. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, let us introduce you to Abdul al-Sayed's evil twin, another third world foreign communist by the name of Francesca Hong. Okay, again, the totally not CCP asset girl, right? So here she is, just to give you an idea. I mean, I think it says enough for itself that she not just was interviewed by Hassan Piker, she showed up to Hassan Piker's freaking house to do an interview. But again, those stances about using National Guard against ICE. She is an insurrectionist, and abolishing the police and a lot more, not making it up. Here she is saying those exact things on camera.
Set the tone. Like, if, you know, I don't want us to continue to rely on law enforcement, but if the National Guard has to be out here arresting ICE agents, like, that's
Yeah.
You have to meet state-sanctioned violence with, parts of the state sometimes.
In 2020, you posted on X this: police exist to uphold white supremacy, defund the police, then abolish. Reform can't be an option. You still believe that police should be defunded and then abolished?
Right now, I think that we have a system where the Epstein class roams free, and our police officers are having to respond to mental health crises. They're having to respond to crime, where I think that if we are to be tough on crime, we must be tough on causes. And I am serious about public safety. Everyone deserves to feel safe.
You didn't answer my question, so please, the question's very simple.
Yeah, so there's a lot more we could get into. She has a long track record, but I think those two short clips already tell the story of who this person is. She is your typical crazy third world Palestine communist who her entire ideology basically revolves around, flooding and third worldifying America as much as possible, which is, of course, why, hey, let's abolish immigration enforcement. In fact, let's abolish immigration enforcement, according to her, the insurrectionist that she is, by violent terrorist force. Let's literally abolish the police so that, our people can basically commit as many crimes as they wish. And let's dedicate our entire foreign policy to, supporting Palestine and those things and yada, yada, yada. And you basically get the idea. However, again, what is the problem? Wisconsin on a statewide level is not New York City, ladies and gentlemen. And frankly, the campaign ad really just does right itself. She didn't just say she wants to defund the police. She said she wanted to abolish the police with those specific words. That's not something you can run from. You can give all the politician answers you want. If you just keep on spamming the campaign ad, she said to abolish the police, that's obviously going to be very effective, which is, of course, why when we look at the current polling in the Wisconsin governor race, again, the type of election that Republicans in the past couple of years have struggled in immensely, guess what is now happening? Despite it, presumably, at least Democrats believe for them going to be a blue wave year, despite Democrats having kind of the incumbent advantage as well as that typical midterm advantage, right? Which is to say that when the opposition party is the one not in the White House, typically they overperform in the midterms. So it should be a blue wave election, all of those things. So you combine all together, right? We don't do well in the Rust Belt when Trump's not on the ballot. This is a midterm year, et cetera, et cetera. Still, all of that in mind, Republicans currently leading over Francesca Hong in the governor's race for obvious reasons. Why? Because Francesca Hong is a radical who is completely insane, folks. Not hard to understand. You look at this current poll out of Marquette, conducted in the month of July. You can see the Republican nominee, Congressman Tom Tiffany, is currently leading over Francesca Hong 43-40, which certainly you might look at and say, hey, that's way too close. Which I completely agree with you, but hey, the true hardcore committed Democrats, especially in the state of Wisconsin, but frankly nationwide, are indeed insane. Their vote blue no matter who. We understand that, but at the same time, let's also kind of be honest. It's the summer. Again, it's Wisconsin, first of all, which let's not forget was the closest of all of Trump's swing state victories in 2024. So this state in general as of late has been an uphill battle. But not only is it Wisconsin, it is the summertime. Typically, as you probably may have noticed throughout the years, Republicans tend to surge and get closer or expand their lead in the polls by September or October. That's when Republican voters kind of tap back in. So all of that in mind, not a bad look as it currently stands. But hey, certainly you can't be complacent because Wisconsin, if you mess around, if you sit out the election, Miss literally said she wants to abolish the police is going to become your governor. And I don't care whatever she says about, oh, well, I'm not going to do that. That's not my policy platform. It doesn't matter. I mean, obviously, we know you're not going to literally abolish the police department, but what will someone with that ideology, what will their approach be to public safety and how fundamentally destructive will it be? I think we know the answer. Combine that with her trying to use National Guard violence against, ICE agents. I mean, you kind of get the idea of the absolute anarchic nightmare that Wisconsin is going to become. However, the reality check for her, when you look at this poll, she, by the way, is from the very college town I aforementioned, Madison, Wisconsin. Folks, it turns out not every place in Wisconsin resembles college towns or Madison. So you look statewide, oh, wow, people don't want to abolish the police. I know, a big, giant surprise there. But hey, looking at least optimistic, again, a race typically we would probably not win in this situation. Tom Tiffany leading. We look at the prediction markets. He's up 60-40. So an advantage, right? Not anything to be complacent about, but as it stands right now, it's just simply the case, Democrats. You couldn't find a normal candidate. What the heck were you doing? And big surprise, it's not working out all that well.
DSA candidate Francesca Hong, she's leading in these recent polls, Congressman. Your thoughts on the DSA now targeting Wisconsin, because whoever wins that primary on August 11th is likely going to be your opponent.
I know some are trying to head this off. I don't know if they're going to be able to do it because there's great passion amongst some in the base of the Democrat Party to adopt socialism. But we're going to find out whether they capitulate or not. And if they do, there is going to be, I mean, first of all, there's a clear contrast already, but there's going to be a really clear contrast because the Democrat that you see on the screen here, she's called for abolishing prisons, abolishing the police, not just defunding the police, abolishing police, and taking over, having government-run grocery stores. I mean, it is as extreme as you can get. The contrast is going to be very clear if someone like her is elected.
Now, it shouldn't come as exactly much of a surprise that the Democrat establishment clearly understands that they have a problem on their hands. They have a massive electability issue, which they do. It's also entirely their fault because they invited and bred these radicals within their own party. But still, regardless, the question, I think, is, will they be successful in stopping it, or what are they going to do about it? Well, thus far, it has seemed like a runaway train. Now, granted, these are polls mostly that we're looking at, and so the primary still has to happen, but just judging by the patterns we've seen basically everywhere outside of, say, Arizona and the Sun Belt, and the way in which, the Democrat establishment just keeps getting clobbered in basically any state that is geographically northern in this entire country, I think you know how it's going to go. But thus far, for example, we have seen the DNC try to do the character assassination thing against Abdul al-Sayed over in Michigan. Clearly, it's not really working there, and it certainly doesn't help that the establishment pick, I believe her name was Haley Stevens, right? She's just this completely ditzy and an incompetent human being. But over in Wisconsin, we're watching similar games. In fact, they're trying to do kind of an identical move to what went down in the 2020 Democrat primary, if you remember, where basically the establishment tries to have everybody drop out so that way they can consolidate votes against the progressive. And so effectively what is now happening is that Sarah Rodriguez, who is the third place Democrat in this race, she's currently polling at around 19%, has dropped out. Now, the reason she's citing is financial mismanagement, like some accounting error. This is what apparently was said. Some accounting error was causing her campaign to report more funding than they did, and it turns out her campaign's completely out of money, which does anyone really believe that? You know? Typical Democrats. Oh, we lost the money. We have no idea where it went. Somalia. But anyways. Basically, I think you know what's really going on because we have the second place candidate who's polling at 28%. Sarah Rodriguez's voters tend to be of more of an anti-progressive demographic in the Democrat Party, which is to say older, kind of that crowd. Typically, it's the young Democrats who are more far left in those things. So the hope is, of course, if you consolidate that 28 and 19%, we'll end up beating Francesca Hong at her 40%. So this is what they're trying to do. And clearly you can see, right, there is an obvious panic going on here that the Democrats are colluding basically now to try to take down the Socialists. Been a couple of years since, honestly, I saw them try to do that, right? Back to, again, that 2020 primary against Bernie. But still, I do have to say I'm not sure that's going to work, because that assumes, of course, all of Sarah Rodriguez's voters will go to the second place candidate. That's far from guaranteed. It's possible many of them just basically sit out the primary. It's possible some of them go to Francesca, also given she seems like the runaway favorite. Sometimes that happens. People kind of just consolidate votes behind who they think is going to win. And by the way, Sarah Rodriguez and herself has typically had some progressive leanings, so who's to say that her voters wouldn't also support Hong? This is hard to say, but hey, it's just worth noting, right? How desperate are the Democrats? They're even pulling out stops like this to try to say, hey, please don't elect the crazy person who wants to abolish the police. But guess what the voter base of the party is saying? We want to abolish the police. We want to abolish borders. We want to abolish prisons. We're this crazy. And again, we're this crazy. Why? Because you, the Democrat establishment, told us to be this crazy and insane. You can't complain now. But, nonetheless, it's good news, certainly for Republicans. Clearly, she is struggling. However, as I always have to say, do not take it as complacency, Wisconsin. Because especially, sure, you might think, oh, she's going to be easier to beat. Yeah, abolishing the police is an insane thing to say. It's an easy campaign ad. However, if you don't show up to vote, there's also, this is a double kind of whammy because, yeah, if a crazy person wins a Democrat nomination, that's easier to beat in the general election. If you don't beat them, that's your freaking governor. So don't let that happen either, Wisconsin. And by the way, if you live outside of Wisconsin, you think it doesn't matter, do consider things like the Save America Act, right? Do consider, for example, that Wisconsin is a presidential and national swing state. And so how that election is going to be conducted and whatever the political culture is in that state obviously is going to impact the way the presidential election goes. So this matters to us nationally. I'm invested in this race, and certainly please someone stop the CCP, the jihadi, the Red-Green Alliance literally working together. It's just hilarious. Not CCP asset, by the way. That's clearly a joke. I'm all just joking, and he's not a jihadi. Yeah, definitely. Anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.